Hello, and welcome to Locutors of Trek, Season 2, Episode 2 on Metaphysics. We are your hosts, Davin and Dave.
Indeed. Ahoy, hoy. It's nice to be with you again. And we welcome this evening our guest for the conversation and author of this lovely book, The Metaphysics of Star Trek, Professor Richard Hanley. Hi.
Hey.
Lovely to meet you.
Or should I say...
Yeah, we can do that.
I love that in Lower Decks. I just think that is...
Oh. Lower Decks is fantastic.
It really is. It's delightful.
Yeah, it really manages to be like a great Star Trek episode, yet ridiculously funny and silly all at the same time.
And I just love that it's all callbacks to to real stuff in Trek, and so it just So
oh yeah,
I do wonder how neophytes react to it, but as somebody who knows Trek, I'm just like adoring it. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Like that callback or that sense of interconnectedness in the storytelling is, even in a comedic vein, something that to me is one of the hallmarks of a specifically Star Trek style of storytelling. There's a huge amount of co-implication and sort of contextual weaving that goes on there. Yeah. So what brought you to Star Trek first? How did you first get involved?
Oh, well, we're talking about the late 60s and black and white television in Australia. So I didn't realize at all. I grew up in a non-academic family. Nobody went to college in my family. It was British working class immigrant neighborhoods in Australia. And I was weird at school. I was advanced through the grades, so I was younger than everybody else. And I read sci-fi, which nobody else did. And I didn't realize at that point that sci-fi is really a kind of informal philosophy. And so just any sci-fi show on TV was just, Friday night in Australia, 6 o'clock, Lost in Space. Everybody was having fish and chips and watching Lost in Space, and Star Trek wasn't quite as reliably delivered because Australia had a very personal connection with British television, but not so much with American. So it was a bit hit and miss. But as soon as we started getting Star Trek, I just absolutely loved it. So I started with the original series. And by the time I was in grad school, it was The Next Generation. And, oddly enough, it was a kind of pragmatic connection at first, because I was, as an immigrant, restricted in what kind of jobs I could do. I had a TA-ship at the University of Maryland, but I could only work within the University of Maryland system. So I was going and teaching class. I'm married, and I was married in grad school, so I needed this extra income. I'd go teach classes at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, because that counted as something I was allowed to teach at. I'd teach aerobics during the day, wearing spandex tights and things like that. And when summer came around, people would say, well, there are courses available for extra money, but really, you'd need, this competition for the regular courses like logic and the like. And I said, well, what if I invented a new course that people would attend and not draw from other classes? And so I proposed a Star Trek course. That was really how it started. So in about 1993, I started teaching a philosophy of Star Trek course at the University of Maryland. Then I got a job. Oddly enough, this is what academia is like. I was struggling financially in grad school. Then I got my first job at Central Michigan University, and I actually ended up being poorer as a first-year assistant professor than I was as a grad student. and thinking about ways to make money, I visited a bookstore in Ann Arbor, and there was this big display about the physics of Star Trek, the book by Lawrence Krauss. And so I bought the book, and I looked inside the cover, and it was a basic book's title, and the editors were acknowledged there and the like. So I wrote a 2-page letter to the editor of the Physics of Star Trek, proposing a book called The Metaphysics of Star Trek. And she called me up, and she, I'm this sort of, temporary assistant professor at Central Michigan. And she said, we can only offer you a $10,000 advance. I'm like, what? Is that all?
Do let me sit down for a moment.
So it was this completely bizarre, out of the blue, confluence of things. And I know at conventions and things later, people would go, "Oh, how did you get a book contract?" And I'm like, "Well, I just read this 2-page letter, so good luck with that."
So you're saying it was spandex that got you into Star Trek?
It could well.
I might have missed something in that story, but
it might well have been. But I mean, that's really the story of my life. I've fallen ass backwards into things that I just did not plan at all, and it just,
that's the best
not everything works out. But I've been generally lucky, and I'm grateful for that. So,
right on.
Interesting. So turning this to metaphysics here for a moment, what, if anything, unreal exists?
Oh, well, that's actually an excellent question, right? So it's which law of metaphysics is it? It's one of them, but it's nothing unreal exists, right?
Yeah, it's the Kirikinthos first law of metaphysics.
There you go. Yes. Now, in metaphysics, there's actually, I have no idea whether the writers had this in mind or not, but there's a tradition in metaphysics going back to Parmenides, who was the teacher of Zeno. You've probably heard of Zeno's laws, Zeno's paradoxes of motion and the like. His teacher Parmenides, who was in Elia, this city that's now the ruins are in northern Italy, but it was part of the Greek Empire, and Parmenides had the view that if you had a name for something, then that thing must exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that view kind of developed and got changed a little over the years, but it reaches its pinnacle in the late 19th century with Alexis Meinong in Germany. And Meinong's view was, I'll put in kind of modern terms, right? So this is what I do with my students. I say, well, tell me about Santa Claus. And they'll say, well, he's a, fat guy, lives at the North Pole, and so on and so on and so on. And I go, does Santa exist? They go, no, right? Okay, well, tell me about someone else, tell me about Sherlock Holmes. Okay, not fat, a detective, does this and that and the other, right? Does he exist? No, right? Well, Meinong starts from that kind of position, and he's like, well, it can't be that Sherlock Holmes and Santa Claus are the same thing, right? We seem to be talking about different things. And yet we say that they both don't exist, but they're different things. Well, in addition to the realm of the existent things, there must be the realm of all the non-existent things, right? And that's where Santa Claus and Sherlock Holmes and, and the rational Donald Trump and all those things are, right? There's these things that don't exist, right? But they're just in their own way as real, right? So what Meinong does,
I was going to say, these are questions not to put to Alan Moore, right?
You know what? I am a huge Alan Moore fan, and
I love what he does with just the notion of fictionality, right?
Yeah. No,
Sorry, go ahead.
I teach Watchmen as well, and I'm wearing a Deadpool t-shirt, but I could have been wearing my Killing Joke t-shirt. So I adore Alan Moore.
My comic book stuff's over there.
Weirdly enough, I got to hang out with Dave Gibbons a few years ago at Comic-Con in Baltimore. People didn't seem to know who he was, so I went to his talk, and because I lived near Baltimore, and so I hung out with him afterwards, and he was fascinated. This was just before he was named the cartoonist laureate of the United Kingdom, and so we hung out and chatted a bit, and he just loved the fact that somebody was teaching a serious class on Watchmen. And I asked him about, the new series that was coming up, and he said, that he had contacted Alan and about copyright and stuff, and Alan was like, "Fuck it, I'm sorry, am I allowed to say bad words?"
Oh yeah.
Okay,
well,
all right.
I think you are quoting Alan Moore anyway, so you want to get it right.
And look, now Picard uses the F word, so why not?
That's right.
So anyway,
it's canon in Star Trek now.
Exactly.
What? Yeah.
So he said Alan just doesn't care, and so when you see the credits of the new the TV series on HBO of Watchmen, it just credits Dave Gibbons as the author of the thing. So Alan Moore, for whatever reason, doesn't want anything to do with it. But hey, why are we talking about Alan Moore?
Back to the class of Unreals. That's
Back
right.
to talk about Ronald Moore or someone. Yeah. True enough. Yeah. So on Meinong's view, existence is just a predicate. Like, if you said some things are black and some things aren't, well, that's, black is just an ordinary predicate in logical language. And Meinong's view was exists is just a predicate in logical language. So some things exist and some things don't. So the class of the things that are real are much bigger. And so then the question is how to understand nothing unreal exists, right? And there are different ways you can go, given Meinong's view, right? So if you mean so it is true that nothing unreal exists because the class of reality is bigger than existence, right? But if you said nothing existent is if you said nothing non-existent is real, then that would be false on Meinong's view, right? Because there's more to reality than existence. So even something that's a throwaway line like that, you can lay real metaphysics on top of. So.
Oh, that line was never throwaway to me. I was just always
okay. All right.
But yeah, makes the Vulcan philosophy very interesting. I would really like to hear what the rest of those laws were. Really. Yeah. So here's a question I have for you. Tuvix.
Can I ask why it? Oh, Tuvix. Yes, please. Why are you called Simple Host?
Well, we play in a band, Dave and I here, and we're called Plain Simple Tailors, which is, of course, a Garrick nod.
Oh, right.
So I just keep the plain simple thing going, I suppose.
Okay, good. Because simple has a meaning in metaphysics.
Oh, yeah. Elaborate, please.
Yeah, a simple is an atom, right? So if you think about spatially, if you think about spatially, the Greeks had the notion of an atom, which was a smallest thing. So an atom, by definition, was indivisible, right?
Yeah.
So imagine a Greek reacting to the headlines in the early, in the late 19th and early 20th century. We just split the atoms, right? A Greek would say, "No, you fucking didn't." Right?
You just found out you didn't have one.
So what happened there was a weird shift in meaning, right? So you had atom meaning in the Greek sense, smallest indivisible thing, and we thought we'd found them, and we were talking about all these things as atoms, and then we go, "Oh, we split the atom," but instead of saying, "Well, that means they weren't atoms after all," we kept the name atom for these things, and so it became a different meaning. So from 1900 onwards, atom means a different thing from what it meant before that. Now, because of that strange, equivocation there. Metaphysicians and ontologists like me have turned to a different locutor, different locution for these kinds of things. Instead of atoms, we now say simples to differentiate them. So a simple in spatial terms would be a division of space that has no proper spatial parts, right? In terms of matter, a simple would be an item of matter that is in principle indivisible into smaller parts of matter. And in terms of time, a simple would be an atomic duration that is not divisible into smaller durations. And I am an atomist about matter, space, and time. So I think none of them are infinitely divisible. So there you go. We live in a world of simples, and those simples make up the composite objects that there are.
And some of them host podcasts.
Yes. So that's simples, but yeah, get back to Tuvix. I love Tuvix.
That. Well, yes, Tuvix. Oh, there's a lot of things we could talk about with Tuvix. Like, we had Mohammed Noor on talking biology in our first episode of this season, so we kind of had tackled the Tuvix thing from the biological angle too, where I was just like, should he be like twice as big because it's like two people smashed together? Fusion.
Yep.
Yeah. And like things like that.
The technical term in metaphysics is we call that a fusion.
Okay.
So, yeah. There are two. When it comes to those kinds of phenomena that this is all in metaphysics. We use these cases to think about personal persistence in particular, right? So in virtue of what does a person persist over time? And so we call cases where you start with fewer and end up with more, we call those fission cases. And when you start with more and end up with fewer, we call those fusion cases. So Tuvix is a classic fusion case. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, I guess my first question about Tuvix is, was there ever like really a person or an entity named Tuvix?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, interesting, because I was always under the impression I always took the angle myself that he was just a transporter accident, and like
he is.
It was never.
But you might have been just a sex accident, right?
It may be. Well, fair enough. Okay, interesting. Well,
certain things might be impugned by that. We won't go further.
Look, I don't have any special knowledge here. I'm just.
Well, you mentioned to me
arguments you make in your book about how we identify from. So I'm going to get some of this wrong. I have to say right off the bat, I come from an entirely different philosophical perspective. I'm a classicist by training, a medievalist. And so I come essentially out of that and sort of the continental perspective. So I had a great romp reading your book. There were so many things I ran into, and I'm like, I've got to move my frame to really understand what's happening. So if I've got your sense or how you argue about how we identify persons or personhood, straight in the book, we'd have to look to Tuvix's own ability to produce new behaviors that might have qualitative similarities, but would be fundamentally different from those of Tuvok and Neelix, as well as having some observable persistent third, even if it's a fusion, third identity that isn't either Tuvok or Neelix in play. Would that be a fair reading, or have I probably missed something?
No. That is fair. The view that I offer in the Metaphysics of Star Trek, which was written in 1996 or 7 or something, right? So we're talking ancient history there. I've actually changed my views a little since then, but the view I was arguing for there was a version of Robert Nozick's closest continua schema.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that now is too conservative a view. I have a more radical view than that. But just going with the closest continuous schema, I mean, the first question is Tuvix a person first? And I think that's unequivocally yes. And then the question is, okay, so is he identical with either Tuvok or Neelix? And the kind of view I was running then says no, he wasn't identical with either Tuvok or Neelix. And so we're looking at, suppose you always have to be careful when you're talking over time and you're a philosopher. So let's make the case pristine and suppose, ridiculously, that nothing exotic happened to either Tuvok or Neelix before this thing, and nothing exotic happened afterwards, right? And suppose what you had was just Tuvok and Neelix having their different existences, and then the one fusion occurs, and then Tuvix results, right? So ignore what happened in the actual story. So if you had what I might call a pure fusion there, then in that sort of case, I would have argued back then that you have exactly three people, right? So so that Tuvix is identical with neither of the originals. And I was basically following Derek Parfit's stuff in Reasons and Persons at that point. I have... So in the years that
how's your view
since,
developed since then? Could you elaborate on that? You said it's changed.
Well, now I'm a committed temporal parts theorist, right? So so what I think is that, forgetting about this exotica, if we just take and no insult, Devan, but I'm assuming your existence has been, in the persistent sense, ordinary up to now, right? So if we just grant that there's
reasonably so
no fissions or fusions happening, right, then the question is, okay, in virtue of what do you has Devan persisted from, and undergoing change of various sorts? That's the mystery, that goes back to the ancient Greeks. How can something both persist and undergo change? And the Greeks, the pre-Socratics anyway, thought that was just impossible. You couldn't have your cake and eat it too. So it's not until the late 17th century and John Locke that you start to find views where people start to say, well, no, you can have your cake and eat it too. And one of the views that I think, I've come to adopt, that I think does this best, is what's called the worm theory, or temporal parts view. It's just one of the temporal parts views that you could have. But the idea would be, well, you now, and you were, say, 6 years old, Devan, when I'm fairly confident you didn't have a beard, right? So, and you were shorter.
Alas, I did not.
Right?
To my everlasting shame. But
so you had quite different properties. And the way ontologists usually approach that is just to apply Leibniz's law, as it's called, which has a corollary that says if A and B have different properties, then A is not identical with B, right? So you now have very different properties than when you were 6 years old. And so the temporal parts view just takes that on the chin and says, yeah, you now and you at 6 years old are different individuals. Now, the reason we say that Devan has persisted is because Devan is a four-dimensional object that has different temporal, just as right now, right, if, me holding up my right and my left hand, I'm actually in two different places at once. Woo, right? Because my right hand is in a different spatial location from my left hand. And that's just because I am a larger thing that has different proper spatial parts at different spatial locations. Well, the temporal parts view is that you have different temporal parts at different temporal locations, right? So you now are a temporal part of this larger thing that is Devan, and you at 6 were a different temporal part of that larger thing, right?
So Tuvix is me at 6, or Tuvok is me at 6, and Neelix is me at 6.
Well, and So, well, let's say Dave and Devan at 6 are two different people, right? But now, if we imagine, that you two somehow, thanks to some freaking orchid or something, get fused, fused in a teletransport accident, well, then the Parfit view is that you both cease to exist but survive in this third individual thing. The Lewis view is that, well, you can actually count, because a person is a maximal aggregate of person stages that are related by, being psychologically connected and where you have causal and counterfactual dependence, because that's what constitutes a person, a maximal aggregate of those kinds of things. Well, then we have two different maximal aggregates, and Tuvix is actually a shared part of two persons, right?
Right. It would be a period of each of their lives.
Yes.
In that respect.
And so David Lewis, who developed this kind of view, says, it's just like space, right? If you had two interstates, you have an odd numbered north-south interstate and an even numbered east-west one. Well, they don't always just cross. Sometimes they share road surface for a while, right? Mm-hmm. But the road surface isn't twice as thick because it's part of two interstates or anything. The only thing that makes it part of two interstates is what happens elsewhere, a branching, right? Mm-hmm. And so the only thing that makes Tuvix a common part of two persons is because of the fusion that happened earlier. And Lewis gives the same account of fission examples like you get in Second Chances, right? So where Riker finds out that, in fact, I forget how many years earlier, when he was teletransported, there were actually two teletransport products, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we call a fission case, right? And so the Lewis view there would be, well, you've got two people who for a while shared a person stage and now they have come apart. So that's that's the view I would have of what happened with Tuvix. And the interesting question is then, how to understand Janeway's decision to, I mean, it's a fabulous scene where they treat it like an execution, right? Mm-hmm. Because, right, and notice on the Parfit view, it is an execution, right? Sure. You're actually getting rid of this person. So, what strikes me about that is that if you take the Parfit view and Tuvix is a completely new, different person, then it does look worrying to just kill him, especially given possible alternatives, right?
Because he does seem to have a unique personality, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Yes, he has different properties, right? Now, and that's what led Parfit to give his kind of view. But if you have the Parfit view, you might think, well, it's a bit worrying to just get rid of Tuvix to bring back Tuvok and Neelix. But I think they missed an opportunity here because what we're talking Voyager now. So in the earlier Second Chances, you find out that you can have two products of a transporter incident. So why not do that deliberately, right? So what Janeway could have done is put Tuvix in the transporter and produce a replica of Tuvix so that he continues, but also produce, do their undoing,
They totally could have had their cake and eat it too. Then.
Exactly, right? They didn't have to kill Tuvix.
Well, and to me, I think that's one of the interesting hinges in the episode. I think there is a sense in which Janeway, at least, can't. I mean, part of that decision, I think, is a product of Janeway's own grief about Tuvok and Neelix, and the fact that she ultimately sides, I mean, on your description of it, ultimately toward the Parfit view, and I think can't really escape the bounds of that particular reading of the situation, right? Because of those entrenched feelings. I mean, she's lost. I mean, Tuvok, who's been in her life for what, 25 years or something at this point.
Right.
I mean, so it would be absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Now,
oddly enough, it's very arguable that on the Parfit view, what she got at the end of it was two new people, and not the old two.
Right.
Neelix, right. So
now they have these shared memories as Tuvix. But did I mean, tell me I may be misunderstanding your temporal parts view, but so in that view, Tuvok and Neelix have this. eventually fuse and have this shared experience as Tuvix. But then when I guess we have to pretend they actually are Tuvok and Neelix again, whether that's the case or not, when they split Tuvix back into the two of them.
Yeah, see, on the temporal parts view, there's absolutely no problem in holding that view.
Right, because it's just now that's just a part of their lives, right? They
so
were
it's
just
like
Tuvix
an odd
for a
numbered
while
and an even numbered interstate come together for a while and then they separate again, right? So,
if I'm right, that would at least depend on them remembering that period of time, though. Having some persistence of memory, I would think of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least true that given that there's psychological connectedness and continuity through that whole thing, then there's no problem. It's an interesting question how much there needs to be, and metaphysicians have tended to be kind of conservative on that, way more conservative than I am. Right. So both of the big metaphysicians I'm talking about right now, Parfit and Lewis, who holds he's the main proponent of the temporal parts view, they both say that for you to have the same person over time, for there to be persistence of a person, there can't be too much overall change. And my view is why? Right? My view is,
an interesting.
My view is you want to be, you want to be another gender or sex or species, why the fuck not? I don't see, as long as it's sufficient to keep psychological connectedness and continuity, I don't see the problem of radical change over time. So I'm quite different from my mentors here. I'm almost anything goes here. So,
well, this puts me in mind of something that
Star Trek,
I guess is one of my favorite real world examples of a 4-dimensional object, which is the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. Right? There's this wonderful quality of it that it was built by successive sets of pharaohs, but ultimately it's built on one reading of it on the sort of plan of a human body, right? So it literally sort of grows a human being over the work of this society over time, right? There is a certain persistence, even though every player in the courtyard, every architect, every donkey, every stonemason is going to switch out, right? It's a lovely version of a sort of ship of Theseus argument about purposive, intentional, deliberate action in the world,
Yep. No, I like that example. And it's funny that you mention things like temples and because there's as I say, most metaphysicians, to my mind, are oddly conservative when they think about persistence of material objects in general and human persons. And I'm talking about people who are materialists about human persons.
Sure.
And one of the things that so Carl Genet had this argument years ago where he said, "Oh, well, all these people who think that you can survive teletransport and stuff like that, right? I mean, imagine that somebody said, oh, well, take a monument. You know what we're going to do? We're going to destroy it, but we're going to copy it, and produce a replica, and then, and that'll be the same as the original monument." And he's putting the view forward as something that's obviously crazy, and so it's obviously crazy, according to him, to apply the same view to human persons. But from my point of view, I take the exact opposite view. I go, yes, that's something you can do with a monument as well. And this has a practical application because when ISIS was blowing up things like that temple at Palmyra in Syria, and I was just horrified at this this wanton destruction of 1,000-year-old things. And it turned out that Harvard University and Oxford University together had this project where they distributed 25,000 GoPro cameras in the Middle East, especially in Syria and Iraq and other areas. And it was dangerous for the locals, but they recruited locals. And the idea was they would take a GoPro camera and they would go as surreptitiously as possible and basically film valuable monuments from every perspective. And then the idea of the project was some asshole like ISIS comes along and blows one of these fucking things up, then at least we can build a replica of it, right? But the head of the project said, well, of course they wouldn't be the original monument. And so guess what? I'm arguing, yes, it can be the original monument. So yes, I think you can, so I told you I'm much more liberal than most of my metaphysical colleagues. So
that's interesting. So if I build like a T-Rex out of Lego and then like take it apart and put a T-Rex back together again, is it the same T-Rex?
Out of Lego? Sure.
Yeah.
I got no problem with that. Yeah. So, I mean, just think, so you're going overseas and you have your favorite bicycle and you think, okay, I want to take that with me. And they say, well, if we ship the bicycle whole, that's going to cost you like $2,000. And you go, well, I'll take it apart, right? and I'll send it in a much smaller box and with the instructions to put it back together. I mean, no problem. Straight up ship of these.
Precisely, Worldman. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we have any problem with understanding the bicycle as existing at the other end. Now, by the way, what plausibly is going on in such a case is that when you dismantle a thing into its parts, those parts have there's a space-time contiguity there. And many people, in fact, I say many, I think everyone but me argues that material objects in general have to have space-time contiguity to survive. First of all, I don't think Star Trek quite has that view, at least if you understand the transporter, according to the Star Trek technical manual, right? So it's kind of hard to understand, but it seems to be saying, well, you dismantle the stuff into its constituent matter, then you convert that into energy, and then you send that matter to the other end. I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that just sending information to the other end is fine. Right. So what I argue in my work is that, you want to time travel? I'll tell you how to do it. We'll scan you as deeply as it's physically possible to scan you. They'll kill you, but we have the information that we need. We send that to the destination and we, use a 3D printer, use, parts of dead bodies from the other end or whatever we need to build you back up again. And according to me, that replica can be you. So
okay, that's very interesting, because again, that was the question I wanted to ask you to get from as many perspectives as possible. We got the biological perspective we got from Mohammed Noor is that the transporter is a murder cloning machine. But your take is that it's not a murder machine necessarily, that it is actually the same person on the other end.
No, I mean, it could be murder. What distinguishes murder from ordinary homicide is that it's a seriously wrong killing. So you could still murder somebody by scanning them and then never sending them anywhere, right? Never sending the information. But given that if it's a regular what I call the case of simple beaming is where you scan somebody as deeply as it's physically possible to scan them. That kills them. You send the information to the destination. You reconstitute as a replica that's as close as physically possible to the scanned individual, and that is a case where, yes, you die, but you survive it, on my view.
Right. So, in some sense, so, well, why don't you finish your point? I'll remember what I was going to say.
Well, I have a kind of complicated argument involving time travel for, I think, why everybody should accept this. So, it's the idea that, right, so if you adopt first what I call the minimal time travel hypothesis, which is just the hypothesis that reverse causation is possible. It's possible to send, for something in the future to cause something in the past, and that there's no particular quantitative limit on that. Then you can send in any amount of information that you want to into the past, right? And so imagine instead of simple beaming, what we do instead is what I call beaming star, just to distinguish it. And in beaming star, what you do is, sorry, I'll step back a second. Almost everybody in the metaphysics literature imagines a case where the thing that results from beaming is an exact replica of you. Mm-hmm. And I don't care if it's an exact replica of you, maybe because of Heisenberg's uncertainty, it can't be, or whatever. But everybody's imagining the best case in terms of qualitative similarity.
They have a compensator for that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
see, the weird, for me, that's kind of, okay, that's one point of having a transporter, but it's missing a completely interesting other side of a transporter, right? So, I got bashed in the eye and I have a red eye at the moment, right? So, if I got in the transporter, I'd Photoshop that out for sure, right? And I have psoriasis. I'd Photoshop that out for sure, and various other things, right? I'd probably go back to having a bit more hair, right? That would be good. So
you and me both.
Exactly. So I think that, firstly, I think that this kind of transporter technology is in our future. There's no technological bar to this, right? So I think this will happen in our future. And I think that it won't just be used for producing replicas that are as close as possible. We'll just routinely use it for things like fixing people up medically, right? And another obvious thing to use it for that, I made a joke about you guys being old like me. I'm starting to think about my mortality, right? I wouldn't just take the red eye out and get some extra hair. I would opt for a rejuvenation algorithm, right? That actually produces a qualitatively younger version of me. That would be just awesome, right? And so in principle, these are immortality devices. I do think that's in our future. I think it's going to be too late for any of us three, but our kids, I think, will have this technology available to them. And then,
do you not think the uncertainty principle is kind of a barrier to that technology? As far as,
that's a probabilistic argument, though. And in terms of where any atom is inside me right now, it's kind of a guess and horseshoes and hand grenades, right?
Yes.
I think I see the point.
Just think of a modern JPEG, right?
Sure.
Compressor and decompressor program, right? So standard JPEGs, they can reduce the amount of information in a bitmap image by to 1/25 of the original, right? So you're throwing away 96% of the data, right? And then you have a decompression algorithm at the other end, and the human eye can't tell the difference between the two images, right? So now maybe it won't be that drastic, but I'm very confident that most of the information when we scan you, Devan, we're going to throw most of that away. And
you don't need most of it.
You don't need most of it, right? That's so. So
in some sense, this feels like, I guess to me, the argument you're making is rather than a murder cloning machine, we should think about transporting more like anesthetic.
Like giving you what you want machine.
Right. But in the sense that, like, one of the parts of your argument here that I was very interested in, and one of the things about transporters that always freaks me out is Reg Barkley, of course. Right. And it's the similar problem of remaining awake during the procedure, but you're frozen because of the anesthetic, except, right.
You've read your Daniel Dennett. I'm glad to see it. That's good.
So and this is functionally the trouble, right? I'm a big fan of object orchestrated reduction, right? Roger Penrose and Hammerfield? I forget the other fellow's name anyway.
Right.
Stuart Hameroff. Have originated this notion quite a long time ago, but their sense is of essentially a kind of field of non-local relations in the brain between entangled particles, which allow for the simultaneity and seeming transparency of consciousness to itself because of these non-local relationships, right? But it seems to me that their argument that because of the kind of microtubule structures in the brain, which this relies on, being essentially put into a kind of dormant state by anesthetic, that the brain, rather than producing consciousness or necessarily doing it, is either inhibited from acting as a transceiver or is inhibited from acting as a producer. In either case, there's some inhibition happening. And it seems to me that, barring Reg Barkley's anomalous experience, transporting should end up being something like that. You know, there might be a moment of disorientation when you step off, but there you go. We've reconfigured you to 22 years old.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely right. I think that's right. I mean,
Okay.
you know, like, and you know, from 30 years of testing students, this is a very common intuition. The common intuition is that, you know, whatever your intrinsic mental states are, they supervene on your intrinsic brain states, right? That's the, you know, so yeah, if you were to produce an exact replica of you, that would have exactly the same intrinsic mental states. And
Right.
any close approximation of you is going to have a close approximation of your mental states. So I think that's basically right. Whether or not Penrose and co are right about what they're claiming,
sure,
I think it's a very, very intuitive way of thinking about these things, and partly it comes down to the problem of other minds, right? So if you know, it just imagine somebody who, for whatever commitments they have, right, they stand next to the transporter, and everyone that walks off, they go, well, that's not a thinking conscious thing, right? It couldn't possibly be, right? They just
standing there with a placard.
Yes, exactly, right. It's just horribly implausible, right? So yeah, but hey, we just invented a new Star Trek episode.
Honestly, that is a great premise. That'd be a great premise for Lower Decks. Just a war machine. Oh man.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So and by the way, again, one of the really interesting things to me in 30 years of teaching this kind of stuff is that my students have just become much more open to everything in their thinking about things, right? So, you know, when I first taught my Star Trek course, I was just amazed at how many students would say, well, you can't survive transport because, you you really are a soul and the soul can't be transported and so on. And you can't, a robot can't be a thinking thing because it doesn't have a soul. And that was just the argument you heard over and over and over again. I hardly ever hear that argument anymore. Right. So, so that's progress in my view. So, and just also other things that I'm sure you've noticed about younger people. They just couldn't give a fuck about whether anybody's, queer or trans or anything like that. And I'm really glad to see that Star Trek has kept up with that side of things too. Just on that note, I just love to death Strange New Worlds. I think that is
it is
brilliant
amazing
series, and just it has made me cry so many times.
Me too.
It is so good. I showed my students today Ad Astra per Aspera.
Fantastic.
Man.
I love The Measure of a Man, but this just blows it away in terms of
it's really yeah.
But I love those courtroom Star Trek episodes. They're tribunal or whatever you want to like. That's another good one actually. When and there's
it's truly one of the beauties of science fiction as a way of writing, in that sense, that we can sort of decontextualize some issue out of its everyday moment and put it in a place where we can really focus on just the structure of the problem, but in a way that can engage our whole humanity, right?
Yeah.
I just there's very little that I find quite so moving as one of those good stimulating discussions between these characters.
It is interesting what you said too about the selective use of the transporter as a medical device, because it really is kind of a cure-all if they wanted to. You just always keep a record of everyone's transporter patterns from when they were younger, and there you have it. You can create a younger version of them, like you said, like they did with Pulaski, and so like I could see why they don't do it as a narrative device, because but they really could when you think about
absolutely.
it. When something's really bad, they do it, but they let people go around with the flu, and they could probably just transport the flu out of them. But
and they do screen that stuff out too.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do screen out. But up to now, up until that Ad Astra per Aspera, the Star Trekkers tended to, without explicitly endorsing it, just sort of take as granted this basic intuition that people have, which is using certain interventions to bring someone who's subpar up to normal is fine, but you cannot make somebody who's normal better, right?
Augment.
You can't augment, you can't enhance.
Can't do augments.
And so
no Julian Bashir's here, please.
Right. Sure.
And given the 20th century's problems with eugenics, there's, I think, a reasonable caution in Star Trek about that.
Yeah.
They built that in. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really does come from that sort of 1960s period, like just post-war thing, right?
Yeah.
But you're right; it's definitely part of its.
And so I'm excited to see how they're going to move on from Ad Astra per Aspera, if they're just going to sort of interpret that in a way that it actually fits into the old mold of things, right? So you know, taking people who can't breathe on a planet and making it so that they can, maybe they understand that as just normalizing rather than enhancing, right? So they might keep the old framework, but allow a few more people in under that old framework. But I would like to throw out the old framework.
Lower Decks would have us believe that they hold Una up as this. They had an episode where she's kind of like this poster child for like enrollment in Starfleet.
Oh,
so
right. Yeah,
they seem to have. If you listen to Lower Decks, they
yes. Well, when you get the crossover episode, that's brilliantly done, because of course she's like, amazing. I don't want to know why you had my poster up.
Up on your wall. Yeah.
I thought that was beautifully done, and then it turned out it was completely innocent. So
that was good.
Yeah, and that was brilliantly done. That crossover episode. I mean,
it was.
Strange
New Worlds.
Yeah,
so good. The war one too, like where they come back to the transporters as a medical device, really, where he's just storing people who are critically injured in the transporter. Yeah, like, that's another thing they could do.
Yeah.
Man, transporters are great. We really need to get on that, I think. We don't need another iPhone upgrade. We need transporters.
Well, yes and no. So here's the qualifier for that. I told you I think that technology is coming, but it's incredibly expensive technology. I think it's far more. So let's put it in a Star Trek kind of environment. One of the things think of the problem of space travel, for instance, right? Now, and just think, remember Vija, right? That was one of the Voyager spacecraft. We sent out 2 of them, and they had, amongst other things, on board was a gold phonograph record, right? That you need a stylus to play. And think how heavy that bloody thing would have been, and so on, right? Now, of course, that's analog technology, and already that's just so old it's ridiculous. So if we were going to send up something, today, it would be digital, right? And now combine that with the idea of, there were reports, I don't know if they're true, but in some of those Russian suborbital things, there were apparently you could send your DNA off into space and various other things, right? If you were rich enough. Now, here's the better idea, right? We shouldn't just be using transporter technology to transport to different places on Earth and to, as rejuvenation and immortality machines. I mean, think of the problem of space travel, right? The places we want to go are so fucking far away. It's absolutely incompatible with a normal human lifespan. And so don't send human beings that are living through their lifespan. Don't worry about trying to suspend animation and do all that kind of stuff. No, scan them and send their scan information into space, right? And
send a floppy disk.
Yes, right. But we can send that information at the speed of light, right? So we send that information off into space, and so we scan Dave, and Dave has a normal life and so on, and the rest of it, and then 100 million years from now, Dave lands. Dave's info is picked up by some civilization 100 million light years away, and they figure out how to rematerialize him. But again, should they rematerialize him? I don't think so. For one thing, he might have trouble breathing like Pike does, and that. So the smart thing to do would be to resurrect Dave, but in a virtual environment, in a simulation on their planet, right? And so
something like Moriarty's.
Yes. And so I think that's the future of space travel. Is that
holograms?
They're kind of holograms, but I'm talking about full-blown simulations, right? So where you can, so I'm a big fan of Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, right? So Bostrom puts it at about 20% likelihood. Dave Chalmers puts it at between 20 and 50%. I'm probably where Chalmers is on that. I think there's a significant probability that that we are Sims, and I think that even if we aren't Sims is the solution to space travel. That's what I think. So, and you'll be able to interact with. If you land on a planet with non-Sims, you'll be able to interact with them in the simulated environment. But there are plenty of planets of Sims too. So.
Now that could have been an interesting way to just do Star Trek differently from the very beginning, where it's like everyone we see is just a sim, because at least all the space traveling people that we see, that they could have done that. We wouldn't get to see the cool ships and stuff.
Right, you can have cool ships.
Simulated ships.
Yeah. Well, honestly, if you're going to crew it all with Robert Picardo.
Yes.
Then in that sense, you need a wee tiny spaceship with a nice fuel supply and some good engines, because you don't need living space, you don't need anything. Right?
Exactly. Yes, and
it'd
the limit case
handy.
of that is no ship at all, just a beam of information, right? So so
a possible end result of what happened to the Iconians, really.
Okay, nice.
Because the Iconians, I think, are the ones who have developed this particular notion, maybe the farthest inside Star Trek canon, that I can think of anyway.
Is the Doctor a person?
So which Doctor?
Robert Picardo.
Robert Picardo.
The Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. In my view, yeah, absolutely, no question.
Do you think he is right from the start?
Again, I tend to be more liberal than my colleagues on these things. Okay. I think that ChatGPT is definitely intelligent and possibly a person. So,
So I suppose one of the questions I was asking there was not to try and sort of draw you into like a quantized problem about that, but is it possible, or what do you think of the thought of something developing into personhood over its life? I mean, could Data have started not as a person and develop into a person?
Definitely.
Could that be true of the Doctor?
Definitely. I mean, my own view about ordinary human development is that don't start out as persons, right? So the personhood emerges sometime after birth, in my view. And I don't think, from the kind of view I have, it certainly is not present, in say first trimester of pregnancy. There's no person there. So if we get bootstrapped somehow, then it's very likely that other things will get bootstrapped. And remember, Alan Turing's original proposal in 1950, right, when he put forward the Turing test, was that he predicted that by the year 2000 we'd have ChatGPT, something that passes the Turing test. So he was wrong about that. But what was interesting was his suggestion about how best to build a Turing test winner, and that was, he said we should build a child program, digitally programmed computer, and let that develop, right? So it's and
Data seemed more childlike in the earlier seasons.
Yeah,
too. He
absolutely.
Very much.
Yeah. So it's certainly possible. Now, if you're going to produce something that has all the sophistication of you and me, then de novo will then it would be my view that if it's as physically sophisticated as you and me in all the right ways, well then it'd be conscious and a person. It'd just be a brand new one. But yeah, I've got no objection at all to the idea that something could develop personhood over time.
In a sense, it's just a sort of a quality or quantity and equality argument, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think somehow you pass that threshold.
Sure. Unlike Dave Chalmers, for instance, a good friend of mine, he thinks that all the ordinary functional stuff about beliefs and desires and all the completely functionally defined parts of mental life, they are just material. But he thinks that the what it's like, the qualitative aspect of consciousness is immaterial. Well, I think it's all material. So
the flavor, as Data would say.
Yes,
the flavor of the moment.
So,
right.
Yeah,
I couldn't help but think as I was reading your take that one of my great dead best friends is Plotinus. Ennead 1:1, what is the living being? I think is maybe a wonderful statement of sort of Data's point about essence or flavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he'll argue, if we're trying to argue about something called a psyche, just as such, what are we talking about, right? If we're trying to argue about a body as such, what are we talking about? Like, that could be a corpse, that could be a dude walking around, could be anything. He says, but what we're really talking about is the living, animate being, anthropon zoon, right? The living human being. He says, and that thing, which is qualitatively different. I've worked in hospitals for a long time. I spent a lot of time around corpses. I know that there is a really powerful qualitative difference between a living being and a corpse, which isn't measured. You can measure it biologically with all sorts of different, or electrochemically and stuff, but person to person, it's not measured that way. But you do know when somebody's dead for the most part. The challenge ends up being for Plotinus how we assign, just as you say, what the seat of those griefs and desires, those pains and those memories and those purposes are. And he lands squarely on the fact that it is this sort of animate conjunction where he says the soul is sumplectane together with the body. It's woven together like light, which I love as an image of how sort of life is so close to us, right? However you want to define that. And so I suppose I'm very taken by that notion. I suppose in the sense that I would agree with Marx that, if we don't have these sort of grubby and material things, we can't have the finer things in life. But I am a firm advocate of those finer things in life in that sense, So I'm curious about your materialism in that respect. Is your materialism in the mode of something like a panpsychism, where you would say there's sort of elementary consciousness in everything? Or how do you state that.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not a big fan of panpsychism. It just depends what if the claim is weak enough, just that it's this kind of if we tweak it a bit here and there, it'll get closer to what we are. I'm okay with that. But I'm not a particular fan of the view, that this has any meaningful mental life. No, I don't think it does. So, and roughly, of course, behavior is not a perfect guide to what's going on the inside, but it's a pretty darn good one, right? And so I roughly divide the things up into the world according to the kind of survival strategies that they have, and those that adopted the guerrilla warfare strategy, those are the things that are much more likely to be minded than the trench warfare things. So I'm not a particular fan of panpsychism. No.
I know.
So I guess that's one way in which I'm less liberal than some other folks around the place.
So consciousness in that sense would be more heuristic for you. Would that be fair to say?
Well,
I mean, it would be more of a activity.
It's functionally characterized according to me.
Yeah.
Just like every other, So the difference between Chalmers and me is that he thinks almost everything in the mind is properly functionally characterized. It's just this extra little bit. So for me, it's the whole lot. And of course, you could go two ways with that. People like Dennett, for instance, that I mentioned a moment ago, his tendency is to say, well, no, consciousness couldn't be functionally characterized. So don't believe in it, right? They don't believe in that quality of stuff, right? So, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to believe in it and to believe that it is ultimately functionally characterized. And just, I would point to views like Chalmers and say, well, his book, The Conscious Mind is a great book. It's a really fun book. Now I'm guessing, Dave, the zombie world hypothesis. Devan, Is it something you're familiar with? Right. So
yes, I think I read it in your book.
Oh, maybe. Oh, was it in there?
Was it in there?
Yeah, I don't know. So the zombie world hypothesis that Chalmers has is just that there's a world in logical space that is a physical material duplicate of our world. Right now in zombie world, zombie Hanley is uttering sounds that sound just like the ones that I'm uttering, and zombie Dave and Devan are nodding, and so on and so on. All that is happening. The difference between our world and zombie world is that there is no conscious experience in zombie world, right? Mm-hmm. And so Chalmers' argument is zombie world can't be ruled out as a metaphysical possibility, right? So there's a logically possible world, which is zombie world. And the only difference
is like a consequence of our universe.
Well, that's a really interesting question. But the first move is to say our world has qualitative consciousness, zombie world lacks it, but they're material duplicates. And so the fact that our world is conscious where theirs has no consciousness in it cannot be explained by the material, right? That's the move. Now, when just to half answer the question that you were asking, and it's a half answer, is that nevertheless, Chalmers' view is a version of what we used to call epiphenomenalism, right? Epiphenomenalism is the view that the material realm causes the mental realm, but the mental realm doesn't cause anything, right? It's just, the image was it's smoke off the locomotive engine, right? It's not actually doing any of the driving, right? And so that's Dave's view. Dave's view is that consciousness is epiphenomenal. Now, for various reasons, I think it's wisest to just deny that there's any such possibility as zombie world. But I just think about what's epistemologically weird about this, right? Because right now in zombie world, Zombie Hanley is asking you, well, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the qualitative aspect of experience, the what it's like from the inside, right? That you don't think there's any of that going on in here, and so on and so on and so on. You know, right? You know what I'm talking about. You feel it, right? So it looks like everyone in zombie world thinks they have qualitative consciousness, but they're wrong, right? We think we have qualitative consciousness, and we're
I've
right.
met some people like that, actually.
Yeah.
So, I may have resembled that on an occasional morning.
Oh no, I was definitely not talking about you.
And so once I think once you start down this road, the problems are horrible, right? But what Dave taught us, that us functionalists, if we're functionalists about consciousness, we have to be what are called analytic functionalists. We have to think that it's true as a matter of definition that mental states are fully characterized functionally, right? So so it's an analytic truth, not something you could discover, right? So and so I go, oh, that's interesting. Turns out I'm an analytic functionalist, so I just take that on the chin. So.